Hello and welcome to another Tech Distractions video. In this one we'll take a look at the Compaq Presario 1692, a mainstream laptop from 1999 that has got some retro-friendly features useful for Windows 98 and MS-DOS gaming. Checking out the specs, we've got an AMD K62-450 for the CPU. This was a lower voltage version of the desktop K62 SuperSocket 7 chip. For storage, we've got a 4.8GB Fujitsu 2.5-inch IDE hard disk, which was very common for laptops of this vintage. For video, we've got the ATI Mobility M1, an early 2D 3D solution for laptops, and this one's been configured with 8MB of VRAM and is connected to AGP at 2 times. The LCD on this laptop is a 12.1-inch active matrix TFT, supporting resolutions up to 800 by 600. The RAM has been upgraded to 192MB, up from the standard 64. Audio is the PCI-based ESS Solo 1, which is good news for us interested in DOS games. I featured the ESS Solo 1 in many of my videos, and you'll know by now I really like this chip for its DOS compatibility. This is thanks to the transparent DMA mode, which uses a small software bridge to connect the PCI and ISA bus, allowing legacy access for those older games. As far as ports and physical specs go for the Presario, we get 2 front-facing speakers emblazoned with the JBL logo, front-facing headphones, microphone, and volume controls. We've also got some media keys around the touchpad, including an internet browser, scrolling buttons, search, shopping, and email buttons. Compaq referred to this as the Internet Zone keys, screams of 1999. On the left, we've got a floppy drive and a PCMCIA slot for expansion, usually something like a network adapter. On the right, we've got a CD-ROM which unfortunately doesn't work, and a battery which surprisingly still holds charge after all these years, but only just. Like most laptops of the day, this battery lasted around 2 hours when it was new. At the rear, we have a 56K modem, a PS2 combo port which we can take either a keyboard or a mouse, or use one of these Y-splitters to handle both. We've got a docking port, VGA output, and a single USB 1.1 port and DC jack in for power. It is a fairly heavy laptop for its size, weighing in at 3.4 kilograms. 1999 was an interesting year in many ways for the PC. The year felt more like a decade with so many changes happening so quickly. Here is a snapshot from a Melbourne-based company called Australia Diginet, with a name and logo that looked very much like December 1999. This full-page ad has got a few interesting things going on. Firstly, starting at the bottom, we've got the usual array of ink and laser printers, which aren't too interesting for someone like me. But to the right of it, check out the cost of that network equipment. 100 megabit PCI network cards were 100 Aussie dollars, and check out the cost of the 16-port hub. Thinking back to what we were rocking at my home in 1999, it was probably the old coax connection, linking upstairs to downstairs, most likely with a 1 megabit connection or something lowly like that. We didn't need much back then, given we used dial-up to get online. There's also the Jazz Piper MP3 player, which was your expensive Walkman-sized digital music player for around 320 Aussie dollars, with about 32 megabytes of storage. And wow, look at those prices of those larger CRT monitors. Granted, the 21-inch ones were more for the professional user rather than the casual one, but anyway. By now, DVD had started to become a bit more affordable, but was still substantially more expensive than a CD-ROM. You could pick up a Sony CD rewriter kit for $310, or get the PCMCIA connected HP one for your laptop for $790. This was the time hard disks were starting to ramp up in storage sizes, and people were still interested in storage cartridges like zip disks instead of CD writers. The range of desktop PCs here is a mixture of mainstream options, with Intel Pentium 3 and Celeron being the choices. Most of the price difference here seems to be in the monitor selection and the NVIDIA graphics card on offer. On the budget option Executive Series 2, it looks like you get a bundled Canon flatbed scanner and inkjet printer, which was a pretty good deal. Laptops were still quite expensive, with top-end models going for around 5,000 to 6,000 Aussie dollars, and the lower end was around the 2,000 to 2,500 mark. You could score a cheaper setup if you were willing to either drop to a generic brand, an older CPU, and/or deal with a smaller, lower-quality screen like a Super Twist Pneumatic or STN, which was very slow compared to the TFT and had that ghosting effect that we all know and hate. The Celeron was the mainstream option, giving excellent performance at a reduced cost. You would usually see these denoted as Intel C or something similar, with the Pentium 2 reserved for the higher end. The Presario 1692 had the AMD K62 and came standard with 64 megabytes of RAM, and a 4.8GB hard disk from Fujitsu, a very common one at the time. Toshiba Satellite 2520 was one of the first from Toshiba to sport the AMD K62 processor, and I had the CDS model back in the day. That's the one that had the low-end STN screen. It wasn't very fun for gaming. Luckily, the model on offer here is the CDT, containing the TFT screen. Compaq had the Errata 1500C, and Acer had the Extensor 511, both using the Celeron. All these had a 12.1-inch TFT screen of varying quality, and that size was generally reserved for the lower-end models. The graphics chip powering these screens was also of varying quality. The Presario 1692 was bundled with a relatively new option for the time, the ATI Mobility M1, a 2D-3D ultra-low power graphics combo. The M1 variant had 8MB of video RAM, which was quite a bit for the time. This was built on the previous Rage Pro and was technically ATI's third 3D chipset. Toshiba went with the reliable 4MB S3 Verge MX 2D-3D solution. Acer used the 2MB Neomagic 256AV, which was a highly integrated sound and video chipset that advertised itself as a 3D capable solution, although this did not extend to games. The business-focused Armada 1500 was a 2MB Chips and Technologies based CT69000, which was also a 2D only chipset. All of these handled 2D fine, and usually they came with an MPEG-2 decoder which enabled DVD playback at a hardware level. At the time it was still difficult for CPUs to software decode DVD playback. But it wasn't a killer function, as many of the lower spec laptops at the time only came with CD playback anyway, like my variant, the 1692. Sound chips, all of these are fine for Windows. DOS is a bit of a different story. This unit has the ESS Solo 1 PCI, which I already raved about earlier. Toshiba stuck with the Yamaha OPL3 SAX, which I found to have excellent FM support in MS-DOS, but the Sound Blaster emulation was a little spotty. It was a popular integrated sound chip nonetheless. Acer used the cheaper integrated Neomagic sound, which on every laptop that I've used seems to only work under the Windows DOS box. The Compaq Armada 1500 has the ESS 1869, which is an ISA-based card and has very good MS-DOS compatibility. Starting up, we load into Windows 98 2nd Edition. Here I've just used a standard build and haven't loaded all the various Compaq bloat. Checking out Everest, we see our K62 CPU being detected and the motherboard chipset being found as the ALI M1541 Aladdin 5. This was a very common chipset for Super Socket 7 laptops. Not too much else to see here on this page, with the graphics chip and the partitions on the hard disk being shown. Speaking of graphics, flicking over to the DirectX video information, we see a lot of functions aren't supported, and that's fair enough given this is a very primitive 2D-3D chip. At least we've got AGP texturing and bilinear filtering. Checking out Quake 2, this one's a little interesting as we've got the 3D Now capable K62 here. The software render does a good job in this title, and for mine the image quality actually looks pretty good. Hardware accelerated OpenGL mode looks a bit darker, not quite as sharp as a software render, but it still looks pretty good all things considered. Frame rates are where I'd expect for this unit, in the low 20s, and it wouldn't be a lot of fun in a big multiplayer map. With Quake 3, the M1 is no match, and to be honest, I remember this quite well. I had a laptop with an M1 in it, a Dell Latitude CPXJ. I'd longed for a laptop that could handle Quake 3 back in the day, and I had to wait for my Dell Inspiron 8000 with its GeForce 2 Go to deliver me that capability. Frame rates in the mid-teens just don't cut it. With incoming, the time demo runs alright and seems to render everything correctly. You'll need to keep this one to a low resolution, as higher modes really tank the frame rate and the experience.
Let's go! Three, two, one.
Moto Racer is a bit more of a lightweight game, and it holds on to 30 frames per second without much trouble. The little hint of 3D acceleration here does make it look pretty decent too. GLQuake runs decently at lower resolutions, and it would be fine for a single player campaign. Monster Truck Madness is a much older title, and one of the early ones to support 3D acceleration. The Rage Mobility M1 seems to handle this just fine. With Tomb Raider 2 in 3D accelerated mode, you can get a playable experience in most of the resolutions. When using True Color, I found 800x600 it got a little bit sluggish when I was underwater. However, dropping this to 640x480 seemed to keep the experience nice and smooth. With Forsaken at 384p we bump up against VSync, which I'm unable to disable. It's a decent average frame rate, but there are some pretty dramatic drops here and there during heavier scenes. Higher resolutions would drop to even lower frame rates. I'd probably suggest keeping this one on the lowest one possible. With Turok, like a lot of the games here, it runs reasonably well, and during the lightweight scenes you can get some good frame rates, but when the action starts to heat up, the frame rate really tanks. I'd probably keep this one on the lower setting as well. Moving on to MS-DOS mode now, we see that the ESS Solo 1 is being initialized. The good thing about this sound chip is it doesn't require any additional memory managers to operate. It can play nicely in plain old real mode thanks to transparent DMA, creating a software-based PCI to ISA bridge. I did a quick run with Dosbench, but didn't use K6WCX or any of those other right combining tools. I'm sure we could squeeze a bit more higher scores if this was enabled. Starting out with SpeedSys, we see the AMD K62 CPU is detected with its Chomper extended core and 450MHz clock speed. Because this is a Super Socket 7 motherboard, we see the familiar 100 MHz frontside bus, which means a 4.5 multiplier is used to get to the 450 MHz. The 192 MB of RAM is being detected, and the video card identifies itself as an ATI Rage 3D LT Pro AGP, which is roughly translates to the specs that the ATI Rage Mobility M1 has, with 8 MB of VRAM shared between the 2D and 3D modes. The Compaq Presario 1692 was a decent value laptop for $19.99, and lucky for us retro enthusiasts, this series was a good seller at the time, and you can find a few good examples from this era on the used market. It's got a good quality screen, has excellent MS-DOS compatibility thanks to the graphics and sound chips, but it's far from perfect of course, with Windows gaming limited to mainly 2D or old and lightweight 3D titles. But for me, it's a nice little time capsule, and it reminds me of a time period where I used to repair and test these laptops for a living. So if you're thinking a retro laptop might be a good idea for you, there's a few things to consider. Number 1, the LCD is probably the most important part. Today we're used to extremely good quality, responsive and low power screens. This wasn't the case in the late 90s. If you're intending to play games, you need to target a laptop like this one containing a TFT LCD. You need to pay attention to the sound chip that comes with the system. Manufacturers started to do away with separate sound systems and look to integrate more and more with the AC97 and focus on Windows usage. If you intend to run MS-DOS games, you'll need to research the sound chip and ensure it's got real mode drivers. Watch out for power problems. Battery or charger randomly switching off, or even the LCD flickering could indicate a power issue, usually resulting in a motherboard fail. The graphics chip. Around the turn of the century, 3D did start to become a thing, but temper your expectations. You're likely going to get a good 2D performance and a limited if any 3D experience, much like we're seeing on this Compaq one today. Upon the arrival of the late model Pentium 3 and 4 laptops, we started to see a real change. Nvidia jumped on board with the GeForce 2 Go, and ATI stepped up with the Mobility Radeon series. Suddenly we had mainstream laptops that could handle the latest games. Another consideration of the graphics chip was image scaling. Compaq was pretty good, usually with support for it, but it wasn't a given. Sometimes scaling in DOS could look awful or not work at all, resulting in a box around the screen or really fuzzy text. The same thing was in Windows if you were running a game in low resolution. Like we see with emulation today, not all scaling is created equal. There are pros and cons with techniques and approaches. And the last point to mention here is that if something breaks, you probably can't fix it. This extends to things like plastics, hinges, components. You can usually get around things like this by using external devices like a keyboard, mouse, CRT, speakers, etc. But then you're probably better off going down the desktop route. Anyway, that about wraps up this one. I hope you've enjoyed this look at this little laptop. I've got a few more Compaq laptops videos up on the channel if you'd like to take a look. I hope to catch you in another one soon. Take care and bye for now.